Hello.
Hi.
Hi. This is Andrea Shalal Isa, and I'm here today with Victor McTeer, with Charles Victor McTeer. I'm very glad you could participate in the Carroll County Oral History Project. Thank you so much for being here. What brings you back to the Carroll County area?
I was invited by my old friend Walt Michaels to come back and be a part of this annual 2-week event, Common Ground. And you can only say no to him so many times, so here I am.
That's wonderful. And how's your experience changed being back in Carroll County now for after your initial experiences here when you first came to be a student at Western Maryland College?
Well, let's see. First of all, Carroll County is really progressed. I mean, it's so much larger than the small little provincial town located in the rolling green hills of Carroll County, Maryland, as they so well described Western Maryland College at the time. It's larger. But there is a greater sense of diversity here now, and it's a greater friendliness. And I remember during my time in the Hill, after dark, one rarely decided to go down into off the hill. And when we did, we traveled in groups. And it's a much friendlier place at this point in time. So as a consequence, I even go to 7-Eleven stores now and then.
You came here as a student very young. You were 16 years old. You were here. You were at Western Maryland from 1965 until 1969, and you became one of the first 2 African Americans to graduate from the college. That must have been a very difficult time for you in many respects, especially given the fact that Carroll County was not very well integrated, in fact was deeply segregated still.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I'm not sure one could say that Carroll County was not well integrated. I could say, however, that Carroll County was well segregated. Carroll County at the time, all the black folk live on Charles Street, and the other street, I forget what it's called, Union Street, yeah. And I remember that when I played football, I always used to make the habit of stopping by where all the black folks at. It was interesting. I came back here 15 years later, and they were still there. And as a matter of fact, what was funny was the only people in the stands who recognized me were those folk, and they were still there. Carroll County wasn't a friendly place towards black folk, and it had a long-standing reputation of negativeness. I once had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Jim Parker, and for those people that don't know him, Parker was a perennial All-Pro football player with the Baltimore Colts, Ohio State graduate. The only man in National Football League history to be named to the All-Pro team at 2 positions the same year. He was a left guard and tackle one year for the Colts. And he knew of me, which I thought was pretty remarkable since, you know, I didn't play pro ball. I played at Western Maryland College. And when I asked him, how did he hear about me? He said, oh, we had all heard of you. And I had gotten there because Lenny Moore and another defensive back, whose name escapes me now, had helped to set it up. And he said, yeah, we already, all of us heard about that colored boy who was crazy enough to stay at Carroll County after dark. And I thought that was pretty funny because during his entire stay with the Colts, he always went back home to Baltimore at night. You know. So in answer to the question, yeah, there have been tremendous changes, and at least some of them seem to have been very positive and very much for the better. Of course, I would defer to the good people, black, of this county, who would perhaps give you a more straightforward answer about its successes and its failures. I think Luther Brumfield will probably tell you everything you need to know.
We are doing a lot of interviews to kind of uncover part of that history, you know, and this oral history project is doing that. So hopefully the stories of that time will become more well known too. When you were a student here, you also participated in something called the Student Opportunity Service. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those experiences.
Well, there were two organizations that actually very related one to the other. Student Opportunity Service, which did a great deal of travel, both in the early years internationally, to work for the betterment of humankind. And in the later years, actually, they took localized trips within the United States, which I was a part of. That was the program that got me to Mississippi the first time. Principally, however, there was a program called Operation Hinge, which had the best impact, if you will, on the local citizens of Carroll County, and particularly Westminster. Hinge was a project which provided tutoring services to African American children, both on Charles and on Union Street. And I had the opportunity to do that for, I think, 3 years of the 4 years that I was here. Good experience. It was the first time I'd ever been involved in tutoring. And although I didn't know it at the time, it's the first time I was ever involved in mentoring. And I can tell you I have had the experience of, going on a trip and actually went on a cruise with an old friend of mine. And when I stopped, a woman walked up to me and said, "Hi, Vic McTeer, how are you?" "Hello, how are you doing?" "You don't know who I am?" "No, well, you tutored me in Union Street in 1966, 67. And I was stunned because here was this lady in her 40s. She was telling me about something she had done in her childhood. So, yeah, that was a good interactive experience where the college had direct interaction with the African American community and with poor people generally who needed aid and assistance. But the Student Opportunity Service, founded by Dr. Earl Griswold and Dr. Ira Zapp, was a Peace Corps-like program that took students literally all over the world in an effort to engage in activities benefiting local communities. Primarily, we were employed and hired to go to those communities and work in the construction, inevitably, of a library. And I guess my first trip would have been in 1968. I went to Ensenada, Puerto Rico, and I was involved there in building a library in that site. And I think we were there for maybe about 6 or 7 weeks. And then my second trip was with Walt Michaels to Panther, West Virginia. And there we lived and worked in a coal mine community, which was great training from Mississippi. It taught me there were places poorer than the abject poverty that black folks suffered in the Deep South. And then the last place I went to was Mississippi, and stayed there for a 7-week period of time without question. That was the event that changed my life.
When you were preparing for that trip to Mississippi, were you cognizant of how much turmoil there was? We've spoken about there being sort of series of civil wars after at that point the civil rights organizers were registering people to vote. Several people had been killed. Were you aware of that as a young man?
I think that very tangentially. I mean, right on the edge did I have a clue about what Mississippi was all about. I mean, when you reflect on it in these days and times, I don't think the college would have even allowed the trip to have taken place. It was dangerous, and we didn't know it was going to be dangerous. During the time that we were in Mississippi, I made the mistake on one occasion of riding with one of my white female teammates into Greenville in order to get food to take back to Freedom City, where we were staying. And on the ride back, a group of white boys saw us and they chased us. And we never found out what would have happened, because when we pulled in after blowing a horn from a half-mile away, the guy who was pretty much our supervisor was standing on the porch of this shack that we were living in with a shotgun, and he was ready to do what was ever necessary to protect us. So if you were to tell me, was I aware, erstwhile, really aware of the difficulties, no, the answer was clearly not that. Did I know about Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy who was murdered and tortured following making the alleged mistake of whistling at a white woman. No, well, I knew what it was, but like most of America, I mean, I didn't know that, you know, he was tortured, that he was beaten to death. I didn't know how he was killed, and I didn't know that there were really people who were roaming out there who could do that to me.
It was probably that trip that made you decide to go to law school, right?
Yeah, I think that.
Weren't you going to play football?
No, I think at the time, somewhere along in there, in that senior year, I decided that I didn't want to be a college professor, and I didn't want to be a NFL football player, although I did try out and went through speed checks and everything of that nature. But when I went to Mississippi, I think I got grounded in a place, in an area that really was all-consuming. You know, there were just so many people that I met in Mississippi who were just so determined. You know, it's like being on the 15-yard line in the red zone and you got to score, and you know, when you look up in the quarterback's eyes, you can see the confidence in his eyes from everybody on the field. You know, and everybody was confident in Mississippi. You know, they knew that some people knew they might get killed. Some people knew that they had great risk. Everybody was confident. Nobody was going to stop us. And seeing that from black folk at a time when I had been here for 4 years and gone through the confusion and ambivalence which is often present for African American students on a campus like this, it's like I was home. You know, it was as if this was the one place where race meant everything and nothing. When you were white folk, race meant everything. When you were black folk, race meant nothing, you know, except for you were one of us. Then after that, you had interactions with people based upon merit. You know, you enjoyed folks because you enjoyed them. If you didn't enjoy them, it wasn't because they were white. It wasn't because they were black. You just didn't like them, you know. And I hadn't had the liberty of having that kind of freedom in the entire time I was here. Either I had to be aware that they were white and I was black, and that judgments were being made because of that. Now, let me be careful and say that one of the joys of being here at Western Maryland was meeting people who I could treat just like I treated black folk. You know, there were folk here who race wasn't a factor for. If it was, they did a good job of hiding it. And I, in return, did not judge them on the basis of race, because I felt confident that I was in the right place at the right time.
So, at what point did you then start to think about a career in law? You've had a very incredible career in law, both in civil rights and as well as in defense work. I'm sorry, in non-criminal litigation, right?
Civil litigation, yeah.
Litigation.
Thank you.
Sorry, missing the word.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who think I'm a plaintiff lawyer and a lot of people who think I'm a defense lawyer. I think that I'm just proud to have represented some of the best people in the country, and I enjoyed it.
How did you, what started you on that path, and then can you talk a little bit about, you went ahead and argued 2 cases before the Supreme Court, you had the largest settlement ever against the tobacco companies.
Well, as to when I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer, it's kind of hard to figure, but I know it was sometime in that last year that I was at Western Maryland. I just felt that advocacy was something that I could do, and I felt that there was a place that I needed to do it. And when I saw Mississippi, I mean, it was no doubt. I actually considered coming home to Maryland, and there was an offer out there, but at the last minute I decided not to do that, and I was offered a spot with a firm in New York. But I definitely had decided that New York was while I loved it, it was a great place to stay and visit, rather. There was no way in the world I was going to move to that area. And the trip to Mississippi ultimately showed me that the style of life and the pace of life that I felt comfortable with. And make a long story short, I just decided that was what was going to happen. Graduated from Western Maryland, went back home to prepare for the bar exam, and then began negotiations on these 2 sets of jobs, and ultimately decided to take a job offer in Mississippi. What other questions did you have again? There were 2 more there.
Right, I was going to ask about some of the cases that you had very early on in your career. You argued before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that first case, that was my very first case, a situation involving a young African-American woman who graduated with honors from Mississippi Valley State University and was fired from her job, her first job, when the school superintendent discovered that she had had a child out of wedlock when she was 14. At the time, she was 25. And the resulting lawsuit was a claim that we won in the lower court, and then we surprisingly won on the First Circuit. And then the United States Supreme Court took certiorari, and decided to hear the matter. And fortunately, we won. And it was my first argument for the Supreme Court. It was the one that you treasure, without a doubt. I went back to the Supreme Court on actually 3 other occasions, but they're on 2 different cases. The one was the Indianola, Mississippi dispute involving actions taken by the city of Indianola, Mississippi, to bar blacks' admittance to the town voting rolls by refusing to annex them, after having previously annexed a large and substantial number of white folk living similarly adjacent to the town, but on the other side of the tracks. The result was that we went back and forth to the Supreme Court a couple times on motions which essentially claimed that it was absolutely clear that there was racial discrimination. And the decision that I requested the court to give us relief that would basically bar those citizens who were brought into the city, the white citizens, from participating in city municipal activities. This would eventually mean that if they were brought into the city and they were paying taxes, they still couldn't vote. And the court ruled with me that that's exactly what happened. That fact, which made their stay in the city untenable, to be in town, they can't vote, caused the city then in turn to bring the blacks in. And so that's the change that was made.
These kind of cases were part of a body of law, of court battles that were fought to advance equality that existed on paper but not in reality for so many African Americans. How do you see that trajectory? I mean, do you think that those kind of battles, that there are still some to be fought?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, yeah. You know that I have this view that there have been 3 basic civil wars. I was told by one of your local professors there were 4, but the 3 I'm talking about is the Great War, of course, involving the South and the North, which basically was a fight by white Southerners to maintain their abject privilege and advantage, that is, to be able to use blacks for fun and profit at no expense save that of maintenance. Blacks obviously were not allowed to make any income or to make or gain property on their own account. Instead, whites used their labor for their own benefit. Of course, that's unfair, it's un-American, but it was the system for almost 200 years in this country. And then the Second Civil War was fought after the First Civil War ended. The First Civil War, as you know, was a gruesome occurrence. 600,000 Americans died in this country. That's more Americans than died in all the other wars combined. And recognize, I'm not talking about casualties. I mean deaths, They cannot determine the number of soldiers who were injured. Those statistics weren't properly kept at that time. And in the South, the figures are even more horrendous because literally almost 40% of the white Southern male population, ages 18 through 40, died in the Civil War. The white folk lost a tremendous amount of property in this part of the world. So there were grievous, great losses here in the South and I'm including Maryland in the South, obviously. But on the positive side, the Civil War ended the dominance of states' rights, the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution in our daily civic life, and installed instead three rules, three major amendments: the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, the 14th Amendment to provide equal protection of the law and protect all citizens from undue and improper state action which violated the Bill of Rights, and then finally the right to vote for African Americans, making us African Americans for the first time. The white South was in dire straits, and in time they developed a strategy to return the African Americans to their prior slave status. And they did that, first of all, by finding and discerning ways to nullify the operation of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They did that by, first of all, limiting the enforcement mechanisms. Troops were assigned in the South, and those troops were removed in the South in 1876. Moreover, the South developed some pretty horrendous tactics. Terrorist groups, and the Ku Klux Klan, and Knights of Camellia, and other groups started to appear, which rained violence of a terroristic nature akin to anything that we have in the modern times upon blacks. This was the period of absolute and horrid action against both blacks and whites. I remember, most people don't know that this second Civil War that we're talking about went on for almost 120 years. So when I tell you that during my stay here in Carroll County, there were regular Klan meetings. We know they were advertised in the paper. And, it wasn't just one occasion. There were a number of occasions when I was warned not to go into town, because, hey man, you got the Klan coming in this week, better stay up here on the hill. Little things like that to kind of get your attention. So we move to that stage where whites eventually get power back, and that's commonly called the period of redemption in American history. It continued up until the late 40s, and in much of the South, blacks were completely eliminated from the public body. Efforts to demean their status as property holders were also successful. So as a consequence, when I got to the college, there had been no African Americans who had ever graduated from the school. There were only two of us on campus, and we didn't see each other that often. Joe was a lot older than I was, and he was always going into town. So, we didn't talk. We didn't see each other much. So we were pretty much on our own. At least I was. And I was a lot younger, and perhaps had a more limited view of the planet. So I was a lot more aggressive in terms of my dealings with people in local communities, and perhaps being a bit activist. And so as a result, things could be very difficult. When I say difficult, I mean that you can handle racism in a number of different ways, especially when there's only you. And sometimes that's the way it seems. You can be confrontational, or you can be easygoing. I have never been easygoing about much anything, and so I would be confrontational, and that's great on a football field, but it's not always great if you want to make friends and win and influence people. I didn't start to learn that skill till I became a Trotwire. So as a consequence, the combination of my youth, my aggressiveness, my willingness to confront anybody, particularly on racial issues, and just my overall stature, made me a bit imposing and difficult to deal with. I don't begrudge anyone how they treated me here, but the fact remains that that experience wasn't exactly the most pleasant one on the planet.
It took you a long time to come back and kind of make your peace with the school.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I'm very glad that I did. I mean, it's a place that I hold dear now, but for the oddest of reasons. I guess by the time, for two things. First of all, Mississippi was a harsh place, and there are very few places in the country like it. But the experience that I had here, and the experience of being shunned, ignored, treated in a sense as a second-class citizen, hardened me. Iron sharpens iron. And this was a good testing ground, a good place to become tough, because you got to Mississippi and you had to be on your game. This was a good place to learn and to practice. The other reason was that there were some things that I had to learn about white people that I didn't know. I had to learn they're not infallible. I had to learn that they cry and they hurt and they love and they hate. I had to learn they're fearful. I had to learn that some of them are Christians and some just talk about Christianity. I had to learn that some are Jewish, and Jewish precepts are old Christian precepts are really old Jewish concepts. I had to learn Jesus was a Jew. I had to learn that there were some good people, just like there were some bad ones. And I had to learn that I could tell the difference. And this was the kind of testing ground that afforded me that opportunity. It's one of the prettiest places I've ever been. It still is today. You come up on the campus and you see it, it's absolutely beautiful. It was beautiful when I was here too. Now, at this stage in my life, it's also restful. It wasn't then, but now it is. And so as a consequence, when I sit back and think and reflect with people that I cared for and loved, I can do it very much at ease here. So it's turned into a good place for me.
He's given a scholarship in the name and that is IRA back to students who he's advocated at the school. Can you talk about the scholarship and what your intention was in awarding that or in endowing that?
Well, that's a good question. My family, we've been wonderfully able to provide scholarship funds to students all over Mississippi. And we primarily had given those monies through a number of different means. Some scholarships we give to universities and schools specifically for the purpose of financial aid and assistance to children who cannot afford to go into school. So we give the schools a pot of money, and basically we say, you divide it up how you see fit. This is for people with financial need. Then there's another group of students that receive aid on the basis of their academic achievement, and they get to carry our names. And so as a result, these McTeer scholars, we're able to network with, talk to, and help them move along the progress. And then we have another means of providing money to students in those circumstances where there are emergency situations. We want to be able to help those kids. But I had never considered giving scholarship money to the college. I didn't always feel kindly towards the college. I learned from some people here that in the development department that Ira was not doing well, Ira Zepp. Zepp was like a father to many of us here. He was one of the people who helped found, obviously, Student Opportunity Service, and he had such moral standing. He's just, for lack of a better term, Ira's a good guy. And he had especially been helpful to me in some of the darkest periods that I had here on campus. And so when I found out about that, I called him and told him I wanted to come up and see him, and it had been on my mind that I had never done anything for the college, or more importantly for the students of the college. And so I told him at that time that I was thinking about giving a scholarship, and would he agree that it be in his name as well as mine? And he said yes. I'm very pleased about it. And I said, well, let me write something up. The college expects donors to write up a brief statement of what the scholarship is and what it's for. So when I wrote it up, after a lot of thoughtfulness, I hope, I decided that I would not give the scholarship. I wouldn't name it. It should go only to African Americans. I know that we are an important segment of the population and that there's so few people who are able to give money to the African American community. But, you know, this is not a predominantly African American school. And this is not a predominantly African American community. And I also really felt that a person's intent of what he does with my money was more important than him getting and doing something I didn't want to see done with my money. It was not my intent to give money so that we could duplicate the Michael Steeles of the world or to duplicate the Clarence Thomases of the world. It's my intent and my family's intent that we give this money so that there will be people who will help and advance the interest of poor people in urban and rural America, whether they're white or black. And that was a hard conclusion to reach, but I think, and we'll stand by it as what we think is the right decision. And when I wrote up this and I sent it to Ira, he was just enthralled, very pleased, as he should have been. It was hard to get there, but ultimately I think it was the right place to do it, to be in the right place. This was the right place to do it. The college had changed substantially. It had obviously begun to work hard to increase its academic enrollment of African Americans and other groups. I was especially impressed by meeting deaf people on campus. I thought that was pretty interesting. I knew a guy here who was one of the first whites to graduate who was deaf. His name was Frank Bowe. Frank's passed now. I remember I was always impressed by his ability, and you know, it was sort of like Ann Richards' old joke, the former governor of Texas, who was the better dancer, Ginger Rogers or Fred Astaire, and she said, Ginger Rogers without fail. Why? To which she said, well, she could do anything that Astaire did, except she did it backwards. and you know, I know what I had to go through. Not only did I have to dance backwards, but I had to do it on my hands. This is a guy who was deaf, and he graduated with honors. He did it backwards, upside down, sideways, everywhere you can imagine, naked. I mean, he was spectacular. And so I felt ultimately that it was in our best interest to do some things that were positive for the community as a whole. As long as we work for the benefit of poor folk, you're on my team.
Now you're engaged with students and alumni to kind of revitalize the spirit that infused the Hinge or informed the Hinge and SOS projects that you moved in. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your hopes are for that initiative?
Well, when Ira died, a group of us, primarily David Carrasco, a Hispanic gentleman from the Southwest who was a little bit older than me, and Walt Michaels. Also, his father was a Methodist minister who actually was here on campus for many years, and I joined with others basically to see what we could do in order to make this happen. That is, to increase the visibility of stewardship and service from the college community to the community, the world community as a whole. And as we begin to investigate this and look and see what we could do to help reinvigorate the spirit of these ombudsmen running across the nation and the world, we realized for the first time in a remarkable bit of intelligence and humility that we didn't have a clue of what was going on campus. And we'll be frank, I mean, we had been gone for 40 years. And I'd only come back 3-4 times at best. And so we began to explain what our interests were to the development staff, to the president of the college. And the one thing we learned was that this was a different world. And so we started to investigate how we could be of assistance, and that led to faculty being brought in and faculty being very positive towards our ideas. And that led to students being brought in, students being very positive. So there's been an ongoing dialogue. And hopefully we will come up with some ideas to begin to generate for a university a sense of commitment to community infused within the college curriculum, which makes it very unique. And I think that McDaniel in years to come is going to be a leader in that field. You can't depend any longer to make it on 36 hours at Walmart. You're not going to get a pension job anywhere at GM. The world has changed. Even physicians, are talking about unionizing because the money's so bad. And so, if we're going to make a better world, we have to think of some new and unique ways in order to do it that. And one of those things is to perhaps even begin to investigate how universities and colleges teach these communities. How do they bring kids into, the world of development of our communities? And I mean ours as in American communities. And I think that'll be the true test, because kids ain't going to the factory here no more. They ain't even going to the factory to run it. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be moving into jobs and arenas that are yet to be seen. And I think colleges should be prepared to do what McDaniel College calls change lives.
I wanted to ask you, you've been such a long time observer of politics and participant in politics. You worked with Jesse Jackson in 1984. I wonder if you can talk for a moment about your views of how American politics have changed and how you assess the current sort of anti-government backlash that's going on now.
No, people are afraid. And they've had almost 25 years of particularly Republican administrations that have been dedicated to the proposition of making them afraid. We're afraid of everybody. We're afraid of the Chinese, we're afraid of the Iraqis, we're afraid of the North Koreans. We're even afraid of Castro, and much of their fear, unfortunately, I believe, has been manipulated now. Let me stop for a second and say, as far as concerns Al-Qaeda and the war on terror, and particularly 9/11, some of that fear was well justified. And that was obviously a breakdown in our ability, to basically reconnoiter our own shores. But overall, there has been a level of fearfulness and a level of disunity and a lack of civility that has been very unusual. Not just on the leadership level. We've had lack of civility. Hell, what's his name? Alexander Hamilton shot Aaron Burr. I mean, civility is real and uncivility is real. But, since the Civil War, when citizens took arms one against another, I'm not sure we've had a period in American history where things have been so divided and uncivil, where Americans meet with their representatives and scream at them in the middle of the afternoon and not allow them to speak, where people even can turn on news stations and only hear the news they want to hear, as opposed to something more fair and balanced, if you know what I'm talking about. So as a consequence, these are very unique times in America, and there are forces afoot who put entertainment above truth. The one thing that I have come to believe as an American is that the American people know the facts, and they understand the facts. They generally make good decisions. And this is especially true when those issues of self-interest, such as other people working to make your children happy, slavery, debt slavery, like sharecropping, like predatory lending, that basically provides the capitalist a way of making money without creating anything, With those notable exceptions, generally people, make good choices. But like at the end of the Civil War, when communities are desperate like the South, or today when communities and individuals are desperate, they fall prey even more so to the advantages of racism or the advantages of the new debt slavery, predatory lending. And so those dangers and its overall aura of fear predominate American politics, shockingly. In the South, where you have right-wing zealots who have screamed and hollered, fought the passage of the 13th, 14th Amendment with a war, and then likewise proceeded to then engage in terrorist tactics and others to regain their advantage. We know that claims for something like separate but equal, states' rights, we know those are really code words for I want things the way I want to. On the other hand, we know that when people are galvanized, regardless of race, to one-issue politics, lack of concern for or the overall nation, when they're so tied down to single-issue politics that they really don't care about the nation as a whole, or they only have a singular view, their own, of what's good for the country, we know that this is a very dangerous period where some very frightening things can happen. We're in a very dangerous period.
What's the answer?
Wow. Well, obviously, if I had to answer that question, I wouldn't be sitting here with you. Maybe I would be. Well, I think there are a number of answers, and I ultimately believe that we'll find them. First of all, we have to not be afraid. And that can only happen with the American public becoming mature enough to recognize the truth. Whether you're pro-life, pro-abortion, or pro-choice, that ain't the only issue. And the fact that somebody is, pro-life or pro-choice should not be the basis on whether or not you want to hear what they have to say or anything. We have to reestablish the discourse, even with people that we disagree with. And we don't have to avoid or be afraid of the answers. I hate to say it, but the fact that we were going to lose a huge number of jobs was built in, I think. And the nature of capitalism is that the capitalist becomes more efficient. And if he or she becomes more efficient, that means it's going to be less labor cost. Sort of as if you're going back to slavery without the slaves. And so the ultimate result is that the Walmart business model, 36 hours, more people, nobody works overtime, has now become the American dream. Well, what about the house and the car and the two babies, and the nice little, driveway? Well, I'm not sure what that means, and for a lot of us, that's fearful. That's scary. But everybody sees it happening, and people have to recognize it. It's going to happen no matter what. We have to grasp it, but we have to mold it into something that feels perhaps more palatable for all of us. I think that'll happen, and I think that it'll be beneficial for American society if we embrace it, and also embrace all the changes that must come with it. Like national health care, like making sure that we feed our populace, like making people more responsible for things that they do. The welfare system as we know it doesn't work. And probably shouldn't be in existence at all. When you try, for example, to develop things to improve a lot of people, you learn early on that you can't give away anything. You just can't. It just doesn't work. And so ultimately what we have to do is we have to give something for something. It's just the nature of, when you give something for something, people do better. They really do. If you just give it to them, they'll take it, but they'll be ruined. All they see is what you gave them. They don't see what they need. And so being in the position where I've been, able to give some things, we eventually as a family learned that we had to give it with conditions. And one of those conditions is you must be good. You must be the best, and you gotta want it. And if you don't want it, there's no problem. You just don't ask me for it.
Do you have any closing thoughts before we conclude this interview?
No, not really. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I wish you all well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. McTeer, for joining us today with this interview for the Carroll County State Project.
Thank you.
Thank you.